Hi Tarot Trainees, I'm back with another lesson, and this time I'm going to be discussing the court cards because they're the only cards in the deck that we haven't really discussed yet. I'm just going to let you know how to interpret them, what they mean, some of the ideas that have done the rounds about them, and how they've kind of progressed beyond that, and how we would kind of look at them in a contemporary reading. Just a quick recap over what we did last time. I hope everybody is having a good time getting to grips with the minor arcana and using all of the information that I gave you in the last video about the elements and the numbers and so on. I know that in that last video I didn't make mention of every single card in each suit of the minor arcana. The reason I didn't do that is because the point of discussing the numbers and the elements in minor arcana was to kind of help you to understand how each suit fits a specific pattern, and from there you can go on and bring your own intuitive messages or look at your little white books that came with the decks, that kind of thing, and bring your own interpretations to the table. So basically my intention really was to give you a system for untangling the minor arcana using the elements and the numbers that come up in each individual suit, and I hope that I have been successful in doing that and that it wasn't sort of too much of a brain stew for you by the end of it. Okay, so the court cards, what do I mean by the court cards? Well, I'm actually talking about the 4 cards that come at the end of the pips in each suit. So we're looking at the pages, the knights, the queens and the kings from each suit, okay? So there should be 4 sets of 4 cards for each. And what we're normally looking at with any given tarot deck when we have a look at the court cards are illustrations of people, figures, to represent the pages, knights, kings and queens. And remember that if you're working with a tarot deck that has slightly different names for these figures in the court, for example, princesses and princes might be one, you might have knaves instead of knights, that kind of thing. You may have a deck that's kind of pertains to the theme of shamanism, and in there you might have like seekers, or you might have a druid deck, so you might have bards and oviates and whatever it is you've got. The themes will differ, but essentially what we're looking at are those court cards. So for me it's pages, knights, queens and kings because I work with the Rider-Waite, so it's quite a traditional deck. But don't worry if you do have different names or the illustrations look slightly different, but what you should be looking at with any kind of standard tarot deck are illustrations of figures, human figures that are to represent some kind of a hierarchy, some kind of different factions within an overall royalty or aristocracy, or some kind of group of learned people, some kind of hierarchy of people that are kind of part of a system, if you like. And the way court cards are often looked at with regard to how people read tarot is they're actually looked at as the people cards, and this is something that anybody with a remote interest in tarot has probably come across, the idea that the court cards represent people in the querent's life, or represent indeed the querent themselves, might represent people that are going to come into the querent's life. So basically when a court card comes up in a reading, more often than not a reader is going to assume that the meaning is that a person is arriving into the proceedings here. So for example, if the Page of Cups appears in the position of the future, it may suggest that a young, kind of charismatic but very emotionally intuitive man is coming into the querent's life. Or if it appears as the significator, it may suggest that the querent themselves is of that kind of ilk or has that kind of personality type. It's absolutely fine to see the court cards as the people cards, but what I would suggest you do is don't be too rigid. When it comes to actually looking at the fact that a court card is a person, that can narrow things down a lot, and that can kind of make the reading a little bit too specific to get any meat off the bone in terms of advice or guidance. So what I would say when I look at court cards is I see them less as specific people cards and more as identity cards, personality cards, or cards to represent and define human characteristics. So that kind of makes it a little bit more of a broad overview. So for example, say if the Page of Cups came up in the position of how should I deal with this situation? Obviously, the question doesn't lend itself to a person coming into the proceedings, so the Page of Cups may not actually represent a person in this instance. But if the question is, how should I deal positively with this situation, then the Page of Cups will pertain to certain characteristics that need to come to the fore, perhaps, in order for the situation to be resolved peacefully and diplomatically. So you might look at the Page of Cups and say, you need to deal with it by being emotionally open, you need to deal with it by using your intuition, or you need to deal with it by seeking the guidance of others, so, because these are all things that would pertain to the characteristics of the Page of Cups. So it can actually sort of branch out. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, you're going to meet this woman who's going to be fiery like the Queen of Wands, or, you know, you are a fiery woman like the Queen of Wands. It's much more about characteristics and identity and how we deal with certain situations. So the scope is actually much broader than simply the court cards being about representations of literal people all the time. There are a few ideas with regard to the court cards that are now considered to be outdated or not perhaps useful. I think for a while there was quite a vogue or quite a fashion when tarot first became a popularist tool for the court cards to be literal representations of human beings in terms of gender, age or physicality, that kind of thing. And this is something that I would suggest is quite an outdated way of doing things or doesn't really serve a good purpose, but it depends how you're using tarot. If you want to use tarot the way I use tarot as a tool for self-exploration, guidance and exploring your options and that kind of thing, then I would suggest that the idea that the court cards represent literal people in terms of what they look like and how old they are and things like that, it's not particularly useful. For example, you might say that the King of Pentacles, if you were using this very sort of traditional method, you might say that the King of Pentacles is a man in his 40s, 50s with dark hair, who kind of looks a certain way and has certain characteristics. This is kind of a little bit, it's stunted. It's a stunted method for a few reasons. First of all, if we are looking at the court cards as the cards that are representative of people in the querent's life, people who were in the querent's life, will come into the querent's life or are in the querent's life, then we are relying on the deck we have to give us a very broad overview of the whole of society and what society looks like. For example, with my Rider-Waite deck, everybody, every figure in the Rider-Waite deck is Caucasian, which is not useful for this kind of society in this day and age. And every figure is also kind of, I suppose, what you could call conventionally magazine attractive, aside from the devil, no offence, but you know, those fairy legs have got to go. But, you know, they're all kind of Caucasian and they're all of a certain weight and height. They all kind of look similar. And that is not, if we are looking at the court cards as literal representations, a very broad overview of our very multicultural society. So that's one reason why I would suggest that it's outdated to look at the court cards as literal figures. The second reason I'd say it's outdated is the danger of associating female and male figures in tarot with feminine and masculine attributes. And this is something that as a tarot reader that utilises quite a lot of Jungian ideas, it doesn't really flick my switch, it doesn't float my boat doing it that way. If a man receives the Queen of Wands, for example, in a tarot reading, and I feel intuitively that this is supposed to speak to him about aspects of his character that he needs to bring out, it shouldn't stunt my perception of the interpretation just because the Queen of Wands is a woman and my querent is a man. The man that I'm reading for, in my belief, has attributes that we would describe for ease and understanding as feminine. For example, emotional receptivity, that kind of thing. Every single person, as I see it, every querent who comes to me has a mixture of attributes that I would define as feminine or masculine. This does not mean that only female people have feminine attributes or that only males have masculine attributes. We're supposed to have a healthy combination of both. That's the idea. The idea is that I have male attributes inside me as well as female, these masculine and feminine traits that blend together to create the whole. And if I have too many feminine attributes with not enough of that male dynamism and determination to back that up, then the feminine attributes, become kind of convoluted or toxic. So when we're looking at the court cards as literal representations of human beings, that can get quite dangerous, because what if you're reading for a female querent or you're reading for yourself and you have a high instance of male court cards like pages and kings? This is not a fair representation, obviously, of females, and we may kind of overlook the Knight of Wands or whoever because we're reading for a female querent and we don't feel like the knight, a male, can represent a woman, the querent. But this is actually wrong. This is dead wrong. The knights and the kings and the pages, if your pages are represented as men in tarot, mine are, they are all representative of females as well. They are representative of the inherent masculine attributes and masculine traits that are needed to make the character of the female you're reading for well-rounded and useful to her and healthy for her. So that's another reason why I would say that it's kind of dangerous to look at the court cards as literal representations of people in terms of age and what they look like in gender and so on, because we may actually be looking at the underlying masculine attributes that a female querent has and needs to tap into. So let's go ahead and discuss how I would interpret the court cards and how I feel it would be helpful for you to go ahead and try and interpret the court cards. First of all, we've already been introduced to elements in tarot in one of my previous lessons, so you'll already be aware of what earth, air, fire and water mean in terms of attributes, in terms of different energies that they represent, and that's very useful because of course the elements run through the court cards as well. You've got your Queen of Wands, you've got your King of Pentacles, so you'll be aware that Pentacles represent earth and the attributes that go along with that and so on. So you already have that to work on, which is fantastic. Another thing that I would say is that pages, knights, kings and queens actually can be representative of an element in themselves as well, and they have a certain energy, whether it's masculine or feminine. So let's just go through. Sorry, I've kind of jumbled things up. Okay. So let's say that the pages have somewhat of a feminine energy. This is because the pages represent the beginning, the foundations, the stability and the roots. So if you think about roots and you think about seeds growing, we're thinking about fertility, we're thinking about the womb, Mother Earth, the mother of all, etc. So let's say that pages have a feminine quality, which means that they are more involved with receptivity and with the fertilization of new ideas and the opportunity for things to grow. So if you want a way to remember the pages in terms of whether they represent feminine or masculine attributes, we could say that perhaps the pages overall have a more feminine energy underlying them. And then the knights in each suit would have a more masculine energy because they are more about forward movement, progression, force, dynamism, determination, and making something manifest in the physical realm, so building something, that kind of thing. So we have that, that determination, that forward moving energy that we associate more with a masculine attribute. Again, remember, masculine and feminine in tarot has nothing to do with gender. Both masculine and feminine can represent attributes assigned to a woman or a man. And then queens in each suit would obviously again represent a very archetypal feminine kind of energy. So we've got that energy of balance, of moderation, of emotional receptivity, openness, communication, feeling. It's all about kind of the emotional realm and finding that balance between making the rules and then enforcing the rules. That's where the king comes in. The king again has that classic masculine energy. The queen is making the rules, the queen is defining the reality, and the king is going out and actually enforcing the rules. He is controlling the reality. He is bringing the reality into being. So that's kind of how I would define them in terms of whether the energy that's attached to them is feminine or masculine. Now let's have a little look at the elements that are assigned to each one. Pages are often all kind of thought of as having a earthly element to them. So they're about foundations. The pages are the beginning of a new stage of learning, or the beginning of that higher stage of progressing an idea. So say for example the aces in the minor arcana. The aces represent that beginning seed. You remember I was saying in the last lesson, they are the foundation, they are the core desire. The aces may not have any determined plan attached to them yet. They may not have any specific intention, but it's that pure will, it's that desire to manifest. That's what the ace represents. Think about the pages as graduated aces, if you will. So the pages, although they represent a beginning, they represent that higher beginning. So it's almost like a student finishing their A-levels and beginning university. Pages are that university member. I can't think what I'm trying to say. They're a university student. They're at their first day at university. So think of it like that. They're at a new stage of learning, but it's that higher stage. They've graduated towards something where they have a certain degree of skill, but there's still that foundation that needs to be sort of driven home. So we're still perhaps unsteady, we're still perhaps unsure, there may be some naivety, but we are ready to begin something, and that is that earthly energy that's coming into it, that foundation where we rake the ground and we're ready to kind of lay the house down or whatever it is. Knights, we believe, are representative of air. So all of the knights in each of the 4 suits can be representative of the energies and the attributes that we associate with air. So anything to do with challenge, with intellect, with the cerebral realm, and with things like cunning and understanding your environment, words, communication, that kind of thing. So we might also be looking at adversity, and we might also be looking at obstacles. There's something about the element of air and the attributes that come along with it that I actually find quite difficult to explain in words, but I like to think that at this point in the course you're getting the feeling of what I mean by the attributes of air. And queens we would find overall to be representative of the element of water. So each of the queens in each of the 4 suits, think of them as having an underlying energy of water. Of course, the Queen of Cups will have that more fervent energy of water because cups are representative of the element of water. But overall, throughout the whole of the 4 suits of tarot, queens are representative of water, which is all about balance and receptivity. It's about depth, spirituality, and the emotional realm. Finally, the kings we would represent typically with fire. So we think of kings as having the attributes of the element of fire. So that's passion, that's drive, that's energy. It might be destruction to a certain extent, but creation also. It's about that will. It's about that pure kind of driven, determined will. And, you know, it's very passionate, it's very raw. So if you wanted another way to remember what each court card kind of represents, you could look at it like that earth, air, fire and water, their attributes are underlying within the court cards. Okay, so with those 2 things in mind, you should now be able to go through each of the 4 court cards for each suit and have a little bit of an understanding of what they might mean in terms of characteristics and in terms of personality and identity for a person. So we're having a look at the realm of human characteristics here, and we're using the court cards to kind of help us tap into that. So let's just go through one for each, and I can kind of show you how you may interpret. As I stated, pages are representative of a beginning, a foundation, a desire for something new, a seed that's being planted, that kind of thing. So it's the beginning stage of a more deepened journey. And say if you're looking at the Page of Pentacles, for example, think to yourself, firstly, that the pages themselves represent earth, that is their element, so it's all about foundations and it's all about seeds. But if you're looking specifically at the Page of Pentacles, you might want to think about what pentacles represent. You know, they represent the element of earth, so they're all about foundations, they're all about the physical realm, the material realm, so it's work, health, money, career. So the Page of Pentacles may be practical, may be ambitious in a material sense, there's stability and dependence there, but there may also be an inability to be creative or to think outside of the box. Think about both the positive and negative aspects of the kind of attributes and the kind of personality traits that a Page of Pentacles would have. Again, if we're looking at the Page of Wands, think the same thing. Remember that pages are about foundations, they're about new ideas, they're about feeling inspired, but they're also about laying those strong foundations that are important. But then also bring the suit into it. In this case, it's the suit of Wands. Wands are the suit of passion. They're the suit of manifestation. It's about forward drive. It's about getting things done. It's about creation and destruction to an extent. Think about fire. Think about what it does. And then, you know, together you need to holistically look at the overview. So we're looking perhaps at somebody who has drive and ambition, but maybe hasn't gotten to that stage yet where they can manifest it with full confidence. There may be a fork in the road, but essentially there's that underlying spirit, that underlying desire, if you see what I mean. Then you can go on to the knights and have a look at what knights mean overall in tarot. As I said, they're representative of the energies of air. So knights are more about you're done with that foundation stone now and it's time for forward motion. There's almost an overconfidence there. There's a real taking on of responsibility. We're moving forward into that next phase. So there's a lot of confidence. There's a lot of vivacious actions and words coming out. But also with knights, there is the danger of too much hedonism or too much responsibility, something that might tip you over the edge. So you need to find that balance there. So having a look at the Knight of Swords, for example, remember that knights are representative of air again, so we have that feeling of challenge, that feeling of adversity, obstacles, intellect, challenging the mind, kind of being sharp with your words, with your communication, knowing your own brain, but then bring the swords into it, bring the element of swords into it. What do you know about swords and the element of air? You know, they're all about challenging perceptions, but they're also about being strong, understanding what your ethics and your beliefs are, making sure that you don't bow down to challenges, but instead kind of face them. And of course you can have a look at cups as well. Say for example that you came across the King of Cups. Remember that kings are representative of that element of fire. So they have a mastery over their position now. They understand what's going on. They can enforce the rules. They can rule their kingdom to a certain extent with that analytical and rational energy that fire and that masculine attribute can give to us. And then look at the fact that you're looking at the King of Cups as opposed to the king of anything else. Cups are representative of emotions, depth, fluidity, love, relationships. So the King of Cups would be a master of this kind of faculty, but he may also be in danger of drowning in it. You know, have a look at the entire holistic overview. Look at the good and the bad, the positive and negative of each. So what I would suggest you do is grab all of your court cards now and obviously put them into groups of 4. Have a look through them on an individual basis. Have a look at maybe all of the pages first and think about how pages are the starting point and pages represent that seed of energy. Then have a look at your knights and think about how, you know, progressing on from planting that seed of energy, you now need to have a lot of sort of hustle and bustle to make it grow. So there's responsibility there, but there's also drive, there's movement. There might be movement without a specific direction, so there's irresponsibility in there too, but essentially there's that drive to want to get things done. Then with Queens, we come to that element of balance where we've learned what we can do by kind of going and going and going and sort of using up all our energy and that sort of youthfulness of the Knights. With the Queens, we're looking at balance, we're looking at moderation, we're looking at being able to get that balance right, passing the water of the chalices of life just backwards and forwards in a way that helps us, in a way that guides and blends with our intuition, that kind of thing. So the Queen is kind of mastering her realm, whatever that realm is. If she's the Queen of Pentacles, it's the physical realm, it's the material realm. If she's the Queen of Cups, it's the realm of love, relationship, spirituality. And then with Kings, we're actually looking at moving on from that into getting all of the wisdom that the Queens have amassed and putting that wisdom into action. So we're now actually building what we want, we're making it come to realization. And so that's kind of how I feel it goes. It's a journey, it's a stage from Page to Knight, then Queens and on to Kings, but obviously altogether it's a holistic whole and it encompasses the whole of the journey and each of the character traits. So I hope this hasn't been too convoluted in terms of what I'm actually trying to get across here. What I'd like you to do really is just to have a look through the court cards and write down any significant character traits that you feel each card would have. So I'm just going to maybe do an example here now for me. I'm just going to pick up a card at random, the Page of Swords. Okay, so what do I know about the pages in tarot? Well, I know that pages represent the beginning of a deeper stage of learning or understanding, or that pages represent the beginning of a project, the beginning of something new. But I know that this person is already coming to the table with a certain amount of understanding and mental sophistication regarding this new thing that's going on. But I know that it's the next phase because pages represent that seed of something fresh. I also know that pages represent a feminine energy to an extent, so there is that feminine attribute to it. I know that it's about strong foundations, I know it's about roots and stability. So at this point in the journey there won't be a lot of risks being taken yet, because that's for later on when the Knights come in with their masculine attributes and they kind of dare to do. Whereas with pages, there's that very feminine attribute to it. So I feel that it's about foundations. I feel that it's about warmth, protection and stability while this person steps into their new shoes and steps forward into their new project or venture. Another thing that I know about this card is that it's the Page of Swords. So what do I know about swords? Swords to me represent intellect, they represent the mental realm, but they also represent challenge and adversity and the need to stand your ground and be who you know you are. So it's about knowing your mind, it's about having that mental fortitude to know where your limits are, what your deal breakers are, and make sure that you're being yourself in a world where everybody's trying to convince you to be somebody else. So what do I think that the positives and negatives could be of a character like this at this time? Well, I feel that first of all, they probably have quite a lot of self-esteem going for them. I think that they probably feel that they are ready to begin something new that is going to challenge them, and they're not afraid of that challenge, which means that their ego is probably quite safe, and that they're daring to fail as well as to succeed. So I think there's some bravery there. I think that the danger could perhaps be with the Page of Swords that there's a risk of feeling that they are going to be kind of swallowed up by whatever project they're going into. I think that they're going to need to remain balanced and stand their ground quite a lot, because they're going into something which is going to affect the ego and is going to help them to bring on and amass new knowledge at an alarming speed. So they really need to know who they are inside, and they need to know that if they come across adversity or obstacles, they can handle them. So there's that sense of being shaky as well, and not quite knowing exactly what they are trying to achieve, maybe not being able to see the end point yet, but I certainly see that with the Page of Swords there is that feeling that they have a certain amount of core stability, that they understand what people can and can't do to them, that they understand what their deal breakers are. So that's how I would kind of break it down, and again I hope that's not too convoluted. Some of you that have an interest in the court cards already may have an understanding of this thing called the significator idea. Basically, in a standard tarot reading, unless it's sort of a one-card reading or a past, present, future reading, you will normally have a card which is drawn, which is known as a significator. And the significator normally represents the querent that you're reading for in the here and now. That's how I see it. So when I do a general reading for a querent, the first card I will draw will be the significator card, or what I like to call the core card. And the core card basically represents the circumstances and the mindset for the querent that is occurring in the here and now. So it's a representation, it's a snapshot, if you like, of your querent at the time of the reading. Some tarot readers and some tarot books will tell you that the significator should be selected by the reader themselves. And basically what the reader is supposed to do is sit down with the querent, get an overall understanding of what the issue is for the querent and what kind of a person the querent is. And then from that they will get all of their court cards from each of the four suits in front of them, and they will select one to be the conscious significator for the querent. So say for example a querent came to me and he was kind of, from what I could tell from the consultation I had with him, emotionally intuitive but also sort of quite hypersensitive. Perhaps he felt that he was putting too much into an emotional relationship, maybe not receiving enough in return. He was concerned about that, but he was also very idealistic and romantic and didn't really want to let things go yet. Bingo, I've got it. Knight of Cups, spot on. That would be his conscious significator. It would be a card that would represent exactly where he is at this moment in time. Do I think that selecting a significator in this way is a good idea? No, not particularly. I believe that selecting a significator based on what you've learned from a very short consultation with a querent, or alternatively, if you're doing it for a friend or for yourself, what you've learned through many, many years of knowing that querent intimately, is presumptuous, and I think it's a little bit short-sighted in a lot of ways, so I would personally not recommend it. I think if you would like to select a significator that has a court card in it, then by all means you can take the court cards out first of all, shuffle them and select a random court card, but even then I don't feel that's necessary. I select my significator from the entire deck because I feel that any card in tarot can represent the circumstances and the mindset of a querent at any time in their lives. So, you know, although I do think that the court cards are useful as representations of characteristics and personality traits and more of the human realm of what's going on, identity and such, I don't think that you need to select a conscious significator. So if that's an idea that you've come across in your book, then by all means try it if you'd like, but I think that it poses a danger of the reader selecting a personality or selecting an idea of who the querent is without really giving the cards a chance to bring forth their messages. So it's almost like the reader is not daring to challenge their own idea of who the querent is. You know, you've always got to think outside the box in tarot. That's what it's there for. It's there to help you to expand your ideas on things. So, you know, to select a card to represent the querent straight away, I feel is, as I said, a little bit presumptuous. Okay, so basically now all I'm going to do is I'm going to read a few short passages from this book called Tarot for the Curious Spirit by Barbara Venn Lever. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I just think it spoke so beautifully about some of the themes that I've covered today with court cards, and if there are any confusions with regard to what the court cards are all about or what they represent, I would hope that these few passages could maybe clear things up. Every woman is a mixture of the 4 queen cards, and every man is a mixture of the 4 king cards, and we can even be a cross between the 2 figureheads at the same time. We are like a many-faceted orb, revealing the face, attitude, and mode of behaviour we consciously select, or one we may have become trapped in. We all play out roles in life, behaving certain ways, often in response to how someone behaves towards us. We have many faces and reveal different sides of ourselves at work, at home, when socialising, and in our love lives. Some people live stages of their lives in one mode and get the reputation of being kindly or bossy, flirty or diligent, because they singularly express one of the Queen's or King's stereotypical behaviours. An aggrieved woman may be so used to being in the Queen of Swords mode constantly, fighting and battling to stand up for her and her children's rights, that she fails to be recognised by her and her partner as the playful, sexy and alluring aspect of the Queen of Wands. She may behave as the domestic goddess in her Queen of Cups mode, being loving, attentive and caring, but have to balance that with being the working mother and businesswoman as the Queen of Pentacles. Likewise, the King of Pentacles may be the independent businessman, who is so busy building his business and living for his work that he forgets the need to be the King of Cups and fails to give emotionally to his family. Some men appear as the king looking for love. They may be unromantic, they may be unhappy when they meet the flirty aspects of the Queen of Wands, who only sees a good time and may have a roving eye, breaking their hearts in the process. As Shakespeare reminded us, the world is our stage on which we play out our life, but we are players of many parts in many sagas. We play the role of mother, father, lover, worker, sister, brother, son, daughter, husband, wife, friend, and sometimes enemy. Like a many-faceted jewel, we have many sides to our wholeness, our nature, and these fractal expressions shine out as only a part of it. These different aspects of ourselves we choose to reveal or conceal to the many different people whose lives we touch and whose lives touch ours. Okay, so that's kind of a useful overview of what I feel that the court cards mean to us in terms of how we would interpret them in a reading. And a couple of exercises for you to do before I go, just to get you thinking before we move on to the next lesson about the court cards and how you would interpret them. Firstly, what I would like you to do is take out all of your court cards from your deck, have a look through them, maybe make some brief notes on each of them, and try and decide for me which of the court cards represents you at this time in your life. So which of the court cards represents most clearly the circumstances and the mindset and the character attributes that you are most used to and most exhibit in your waking life. And if you do that exercise and you found it useful, or you'd like to tell me what the answer was, please post it below. Let me know which court card you feel in your deck represents you and why. And then I would also like you to turn all of your court cards over so you can't see them, shuffle them, and do a few random draws. Just do a few cards, draw a few cards that you may not have such a connection with. If you turn all of your cards over, then the card you draw is the card you draw, and you just have to give your reaction to it, whether you feel a certain connection with it or not. For example, I don't feel much of a connection to the Queen of Pentacles, and when the Queen of Pentacles appears in a spread and it's kind of asking me to consider which attributes and characteristics from her repertoire I need to be injecting into my life, that can be difficult and challenging for me because I don't actually relate much to the way she is and to the attributes she exudes naturally. So it's kind of a challenge to me when she comes up in a reading. I have to really get my thinking cap on and consider, well, which attributes do I need from her to actually inject into my own life? Okay, I've really enjoyed doing this lesson, and I really do hope that it hasn't been too convoluted. The court cards are complicated. They are known as a complex bunch of cards. They do kind of have a lot of dilemmas and endless conundrums attached to them, particularly with regard to how much they are literally supposed to represent figures and that kind of thing. But as I said, I would see them less as people cards and more as identity cards or personality cards. They are cards that are often addressing human characteristics. They don't need to just be representing a person. They may not necessarily be representing you. As I said, if they do come up as an advice card, for example, then they may just be asking the querent to draw on certain characteristics that that particular court card tends to exude or represent. So there is a lot more scope than you would think, and some of the books are kind of a little bit, I suppose, unhelpful with regard to how much scope and how much possibility there is with the court card. So I'm just hoping that this has opened you up to a few ideas that you may not have thought of. And if you have any reactions or feedback to this lesson overall, then do post it below. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Just before I go, just to let you know, the shop has been closed for Christmas and New Year. I'm opening it at some point this weekend, and I will be offering some workshops after this beginner's course finishes for more in-depth subjects which people have come to me and requested as kind of a more in-depth workshop, or workshops about stuff that I would like to do with regard to tarot that I kind of know a hell of a lot about but don't really want to kind of infect the channel with, because otherwise it's just going to be advanced tarot all the way, and there are other things I would like to talk about, and I'm sure that there are people who aren't interested in tarot who might like to hear me talk about something else as well. So yeah, there will be some cheap workshops on the go. If any of you did want to push yourself into the intermediate stage after this finishes, let me know. And Facebook, I have a Facebook fan page. I put some bits and pieces about tarot on there. Every so often I just post a little bit of tarot wisdom. If I'm having a random thought about a card, I might sort of write a little message about it, sort of a positive affirmation or a little bit of wisdom or advice from the deck. So if you do need a daily dose of tarot, add me on Facebook and ask me to add you in return if you have a page. I would love to become a fan of it, so let me know. Okay people, thank you so much for listening, and have a really great weekend if you're watching this at the weekend. Bye.